Little we know that, in the First World War, we had 5 Indian fighter pilots. One of them was an ace. An ace was someone who you had to bring down 7 planes to become an ace those days. And Laddie Roy, Indralal Roy, had brought down 10 German planes at the age of 19. So that was Laddie Roy. And when he died, and his grave is there in southern France, the epitaph of that grave reads in French and Bangla. Why so? Because when he died and after the war ended, the French made the epitaph and they decided that, this guy was from Bengal and he's from India. He's fighting for the British Indian Army, but he was from Bengal. And he died in France. So they were conscious of the cultural sensitivity of it. And when he died, the German forces then stopped fighting and brought a French priest to ensure that the war was stopped for a while, and then his burial had taken place. So this is the kind of respect that he had generated amongst the German forces then.
What is it that we have that the Chinese don't?
The short answer to that is the Indian soldier. The Indian soldier is very, very experienced. The Chinese soldier, man to man, cannot match. They may have a lot of equipment, they have the latest state-of-the-art equipment and all that, but finally it boils down to the man behind the weapon.
After a session discussing governance and Indian history, they have brought in a panel which is going to talk about military. And what I would like to say about governance, history and military is that probably the most governed and the best governing organization in this country for any incident, accident, calamity, earthquake, borewell, everything else is Indian Army. Having said that, I would also make a absolute disclaimer that I am not a proponent of going the Pakistan way where the military goes into governance. So let's start this session, and the session is about battlefield tales for the young. I think everyone is young at heart when they talk about military and the experiences and the stories. And we will try and decipher, or we'll try and gather some of them from our esteemed panelists. I had the good fortune of serving with General Joshi, great book which he has recently released, and the title is very strong, Who Dares Wins. And I think that is also a 3-word advertisement for him as a person and his life experience. Probal, of course, I have worked with him for about 2-3 years now. We are great friends. And he's written about 1 million words in 2 books, and the third one is coming with another 500,000. The only thing that this book's title doesn't cover, as its word is camouflaged, is the brilliance of the stories which are narrated in it. So both these books, I think I would recommend both of you to read, all of you to read. Everyone knows General Joshi. He's a living legend, a Veer Chakra recipient, and he's been the man who's actually fought the battles on ground. In his book, he's written his entire life story from where it started and what he's doing now. So a lot of people experience wars and battles from the television sets, especially the battle which made you, or the war that made you a household name, was probably the first televised battle in India. But the experience on ground is completely different. So let us start by setting the stage and telling the audience that what is it like to be in complete darkness, extreme cold, lack of oxygen, and enemy wanting to kill you. What is that experience like? And then, of course, we'll segue into other stories and other incidents from your book, sir.
Thank you, Nikhil, and thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here talking about the tales, the battle tales and the Kargil War actually. So these were very difficult times, while we see in the movies, how battles are fought. But when you're into actual operations, when people are dying, it's extremely difficult. It's not easy, to say the least. Just to put things in perspective, the day I reached Dras, that was on the 12th of June, 1999, about 25 and a half years ago, the scene that was in front of me, unfolding. In fact, before that, let me talk about the terrain in which this battle was fought. I'm talking to an audience in Mumbai. I'm not sure how many have been to Ladakh. When you go to Ladakh, cross the Zojila Pass, it is, the areas where the battles were fought is super high altitude, about 18,000 feet and above, sub-zero temperatures, glaciated terrain, lack of oxygen. And movement through the mountains is extremely slow, and there's too much of fatigue. Troops have to acclimatize. Even your weapons, they have to be recalibrated. They also don't work properly at those altitudes and the atmosphere. So those were the conditions in which we were fighting the battles. And the enemy was sitting on top, in dominating positions, looking down at you and firing at you, pick and choose. And we were to climb up on those mountains, along those spur lines, and attack and dislodge the enemy from there. So those were the difficult circumstances under which we were fighting the battles. Now back to 12th of June, which I can never forget in my life. When I reached Dras, the scene in front of me, I close my eyes, I can visualize it any time. Barren mountains all around. You see a board in front of you which has been put by the BRO, which says Dras, the second coldest inhabited place in the world at minus 60 degree temperatures, which was measured a couple of years before 1999. And then what you see all around is artillery shelling, that is going on, all around you. There's a vehicle in front of you which has caught fire, which has been hit by a RT shell. And there are airbursts happening in front of you. Casualties are being evacuated. Ambulances taking, fatal, non-fatal casualties into the ad hoc hospital that has been established there in Dras. And then, when you go to the brigade quarters, the next order you get, you have to take your battalion up to Tololing. That is from where all this fire is coming. So what comes to your mind first thing is fear. We don't say that, you can't say, if I say that I didn't have fear in my mind, that's not right. So that's where your training comes in. Courage is not about not having fear. Courage is not letting fear come into the way of doing your duty. So, those are the conditions under which we were fighting the battles there.
Thank you so much, sir. And I think that sets the stage for me to ask Probal. Both your books are about battle histories. One is a collection of short stories. The first one is of Indian, where India gave a fitting rebuttal to China in 1967. But both of them carry a description which says forgotten. And that is not something that we would like to be associated with. They are the greatest tales of valor, the greatest, where people have braved the odds, shown extreme daring. Their stories are forgotten. Why do you think you had to put this word in there called forgotten in the descriptor of the book?
Thank you, Nikhil, and thanks everyone for bringing yourself here on a Sunday morning and, sitting through the first session, the second one, and we hope to have a great and engaging session this one as well. Great question, Nikhil. Why forgotten? So let me take a step back and talk about the previous book that you mentioned, Watershed 1967, which talks about India's victory over China that paved the way for history to follow. I'll take a lead from what Hindole mentioned a little while ago. He said, we have been believers in history being canonical. That goes for military history as well. We have believed that, what was written by Neville Maxwell for the 1962 war was the way war would have happened, was the way the politics of war would have happened. It's a very well-known book on India in the Sino-Indian War of 1962. We have always categorized our history in terms of frameworks that have been given forever, and we haven't ever challenged them. In that process, we have forgotten some of the things, some of the wars, some of the conflicts that have actually changed. And it's not the military part of it, and I don't consider this as a part of military history alone. I think military history is a part of the political history, part of the continent, part of India's history, and it is not a categorization of military history. It's part of the process it's a civilizational process of this country, post-independence, pre-independence. So the victory of 67 was forgotten, and the reason why it was never brought up, because we believe that the ones that were given to us were the only ones that happened, right? So we haven't really challenged, and we didn't look at what could have been the transformational decade between 62 and 71. So that is where I go back to in terms of identifying great works done by historians. Arjun Subramaniam is one of the most eminent war historians in India. Great works done. But, I thought it would be good to add to the existing works, and that's where filling in those areas are concerned. Now you talk about the word forgotten. We have, the idea was to look at where in the last 100 years in the making of the world that we see today, India had a hand. India had hand in the events that were there at the turn of the century. The First World War, the Second World War. In the First World War, 1.5 million Indian soldiers went to fight in France and Belgium, countries that they were not familiar with. They were fighting against Germany, a country they had no enmity with. So these are stories not just in the military realm, but I wanted to string together the stories that are plotted along the trajectory of India's history in the last 100 years and the role soldiers from India, from different parts of India, played in the evolution or in the transformation of the world in the last century. That's where it all boils down to. And I thought, it's important to pick up these stories. And there are many more. These are 10. But these are symbolic of the eras they represent. The protagonists represent what India, where India was at that point of time. And in turn, it sort of also projects how they played a role in the historical progress of this country.
Thank you so much. We are all aware that right since, we have all read about Porus fighting a battle on the banks of Hydaspes against Alexander. And take from that day till 2611, we have heard of Major Sandeep Unikrishnan fighting the Pakistani terrorists. One realizes that many of those stories in between have got lost. Thankfully, the story of Captain Vikram Batra has not got lost. I presume most of you would have seen this movie, Shershah. Sir was the commanding officer of Captain Vikram Batra, on whose orders he fought the battle so valiantly, and of course was awarded with Paramveer Chakra. But what we want to know, sir, or the nation wants to know, or the audience wants to know, is what was he like as a person, and what was he like as a soldier?
So, I interacted with Vikram Batra very closely. He was one of my company commanders during the Kargil War. He was a, completely different kind of person actually. Full of initiative, very bubbly, and ever smiling. He's got a twin brother, Vishal, who's working for the ICICI, and he's again very, very similar. Obviously, they're twins, identical twins. But Vikram Batra, whenever I interacted with him in battle, and whenever I gave him a task, there was never a no. I mean, even before I could complete, my sentence of telling him what he's got to do, he would jump up and say, it'll be done. And not just for the sake of saying it, he would always do the task, to the required extent that was supposed to be done, and would always look for, something beyond, to do something much more beyond, what we look for in the army when we do a tasking. And that also, spoke about when we attacked point 5140 on the Tololing Ridge in the Dras subsector. And he was one of the company commanders who was, leading the assault of Delta Company. And once we had made the plans, we sat down and discussed. I gave them a pep talk, to raise their morale and all that. Then I asked him that, Vikram, what will be your success signal of your battalion? When we launch an attack and capture a feature, the company commanders, once he has done his job, gives reports back to the commanding officer, giving his success signal. So I asked him that what will be the success signal of Delta Company once you capture 0.5140, and he came up with, the now obviously the very famous. So it was, he just said it then, and they became a household kind of slogan that time, and continues to be, "Ye dil mange more." And I was pretty amused that time that, what is this nonsense? Literally, I told him that, what are you saying? What is dil mange more? He said, no, sir, I will capture those bunkers which are there on 0.5140. Then I'll look for some more bunkers to capture. And which actually happened, because we didn't have the kind of intelligence of how much the enemy is sitting on top on those features, how many bunkers are there, what is the strength of the enemy. We could just see 2 sanghas based on which we had made the plan. And we executed the plan. And when Vikram Batra captured that particular area, his company, under his command, then when they further, we call it reorganize on the objective, and he moved ahead, there were 4 more bunkers, exactly to his success signal, Dil Mange More. Then the company captured those bunkers as well. And then early in the morning of 20th of June 1999, at 4:35, again, these things are ingrained in my brain. He came on the radio set and gave me the success signal, Ye Dil Mange More. So that was the kind of person he was. And even later, when he finally laid down his life on point 4875 in the Mashko Valley, it was totally his initiative. He had gone to evacuate Captain Naveen, who was badly injured, in close proximity to the enemy. And after having done that, he realized that, 13 Chakre was stuck up for about 2 days. We were not able to progress because there was a narrow ledge across which the enemy was sitting. He, just went and took his AK and single-handedly assaulted across. And of course, killed the Pakistani soldiers. But in the bargain, because he assaulted frontally, it was broad daylight. And he got shot, laid down his life, but he gave us a foothold. And immediately, both the companies which were there went and assaulted and captured the entire feature. So that was the kind of, brave, raw, courage person he was.
Sir, I think Vikram Batra captured the hill for the Indian Army, but Pepsi benefited the most from their marketing slogan. Moving on to Probal now, and your book covers almost 100 years span. My favorite book, of course, fiction, which in this festival I cannot profess that I read, is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. But your book has got nothing about solitude. It's completely action, battle, lot of, valor. So why did you choose to do it for over a span of 100 years?
So I must also add that, I've tried to explore the grey in the stories the last 100 years, in the war stories, the human interest angles, where you can't really look at the rights and the wrongs. People have taken decisions on the spur of the moment and explore why they did so. There are stories of solitude. There's one story of a prisoner of war where he spends the entire Second World War period in the prison, and he explores and he writes a diary each day of his life. We'll come to that, and that's a story where he looks at the war from inside the prison, and he documents it in his diary, and that's a story that I discovered along the way. But 100 years, like I said, at the turn of the century, the airplanes were invented, and they were like the force multiplier of the First World War. And little we know that, in the First World War, we had 5 Indian fighter pilots. 5 of them. One of them was an ace. An ace was someone who you had to bring down 7 planes to become an ace those days. And Laddie Roy, Indralal Roy, had brought down 10 German planes at the age of 19. So that was Laddie Roy, and when he died, and his grave is there in southern France, the epitaph of that grave reads in French and Bangla. Why so? Because when he died, and after the war ended, the French made the epitaph, and they decided that, this guy was from Bengal, and he's from India. He's fighting for the British Indian Army, but he was from Bengal. And he died in France. So they were conscious of the cultural sensitivity of it. So they wrote the epitaph in French and in Bangla. That is Indralal Roy's epitaph in France. And when he died, the German forces then stopped fighting and brought a French priest to ensure that the war was stopped for a while, and then his burial had taken place. So this is the kind of respect that he had generated amongst the German forces then. In 1917, then you had a lot of these other. Every time there was the introduction of tanks in the Second World War. Again, Indians were involved. Then you had after independence, you had different kinds of stories, wherein the stories come from the territory, the borders, because here was a new nation trying to prove itself in a testy neighborhood. And you had stories far away. And that's why, you see these stories plotted alongside the graph of India's history. And then you have the latter half of the book, which have stories in the last 30 odd years, which again talk about complex issues, identity problems, insurgencies, where you are fighting enemies who do not wear uniforms. So there are different kinds of stories across the last 100 years. The idea was to, sort of explore how these stories stack up against the history of the nation at that particular point in time. And we have had the 10 stories that actually represent that era that we're talking about.
And since we are talking about stories that represent incidents, and some of those incidents have been forgotten, hidden, not been given their due, So I wanted to ask you, you were in battle for a long time. Multiple, assaults were carried out. Multiple victories were won. And a lot of it is documented. A lot of it is well known. But I'm sure there are certain battles which you felt that they were critical. Without doing that, you couldn't have gone ahead. And yet, they are underrepresented, under known or lesser known. Only you probably carry the knowledge of which is that one significant battle or two significant incidents which changed the whole course of tide in Kargil.
The infiltrations that happened along the line of control in Ladakh in 1999 was, over a frontage of 100 kilometers. So there was no one particular battle, which was, very, very important in the sense that because of which, only after that succeeded that we could proceed ahead. These were happening parallelly all across in the Dras sector. In fact, if you look from left to right, from Zojala Pass, the Mashko Valley, the Dras, the Kargil, the Batalik, Turtuk subsectors and all that. So all of them were important. But one of the first biggest victory that happened, which sort of, I would say, paved the way for the capture of the rest of the areas was Tololing, which was initially assaulted by 18 grenadiers, where we lost the 2IC of the battalion, Colonel Vishwanathan, and then finally captured by 2 Rajrif. Colonel M.B. Ravindranath was leading the battalion. And once Tololing was captured, there was a general raising of morale in the entire Indian army that we can also do it. It was you are aware, like I explained earlier, extremely difficult circumstances. But again, these are battles which are well known. So why some of the battles are not well known, I'll talk about them, is that the battles that were fought in the Mashko and the Dras and the Kargil subsectors were easily accessible to the media as well. This was, like you mentioned earlier, that this was the first battle wherein the media had a major role to play, and what was happening in Ladakh, in Kargil, Dras, Mashko was being beamed into the bedrooms of the entire nation, and the whole world came to know what is happening, which was a big morale booster. I'll talk about that later for us. But areas like Batalik, where again major battles were fought, Khalubar, Jubar, Kokarthang, 0.5203. I'm sure you have not heard about these words, these names. But these are the places where Manoj Pandey got his Paramveer Chakra, 111 Gurkhas. This is the place where Sonam Wangchuk of Ladakh Scout got his Mahavir Chakra. So there were battles where the media could not reach. And while, they all documented, but with regard to, popularizing them in the nation, that didn't happen. But yeah, back to the media, once we captured 5140 and we came down, I was told that, when you go back to, we were told to go and have a rest and leave it for 10 days. And we de-inducted from Dras and went back to a place called Gumri, just across the Zojala Pass. And there, Barkhadat came and met me. I mean, I had approvals from the div headquarters that, you can give them the interview and whatever she's asking. And she wanted to do, the effect of weather and terrain and climate on the operations, etc. And when I explained to her operations on 0.5140, Dil Mange More, she was very excited. And then she did a detailed interview. She took me back from Gumri, about 60 kilometers back to Dras. And against the Tololing and Tiger Hill in the background, she took my first interview where I talk about Vikram Batra and Dil Mange More. And next day, she took those cassettes, put them in a chopper, and they were down, and we were all over the nation. And once that started, we used to get letters from, people from all walks of life of the entire nation. Students, principals, businessmen, youth of the nation, that, sir, you're doing excellent job, 13 Jakaref, doing excellent job, we are proud of you. And thousands of letters, which I had to read out, some of them to the troops, whenever we got the time, and put them on the notice board in our base. And, we got a feeling that the entire nation is with us. So media did a really outstanding job. Otherwise, normally, we are sitting on the line of control and, firing is going on, people are dying, and we are fighting these battles. And back in Delhi and elsewhere, normal life goes on. Nobody knows. I mean, we are far off away. But this time the media did an outstanding job.
I think we have Sandeep here, so he's a media guy through and through. He'll pass on these beautiful words back to the Noida circuit, I believe. And I must say that Barkha was very persuasive, sir, that she could make battle fatigue soldiers go back in and climb those hills to take an interview. But coming to you, Probal, and we know that sport is a analogy for war or battle. And as in sport, there is victory. As in battle, there is defeat. Wimbledon centre court entrance quotes those famous lines from Rudyard Kipling about triumph and disaster and treating them together. And there is a story in your book about a person who transcends sport and battlefield, who's an Olympic gold medalist, lands up in battle, faces defeat, goes through the tribulations, goes through, almost like a challenge to his own personality, comes back, gets back on the Olympic team, probably one of the elderly statesmen in a very field sport, and wins the gold medal again. And that itself shows the whole script of how life and battle can be, or sport and battle can be together. I think I've given away a little bit of a story. I think you should give the other.
So, since you've given away the story, let me start with another story. So the book starts with, but you're right, the book starts with cricket. The book starts with cricket. It starts with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle bowling right arm off spin to my character. So the book starts with cricket, and we are in Bombay, we are in Mumbai. We had a conversation about Bombay to Mumbai in the morning. Cricket is an essential part of the city. Not that Delhiites don't play good cricket. But yes, it starts with Arthur Conan Doyle bowling spin and to this character, Hardeep Malik, who was playing county cricket then. But and when he'd gone out to bat, at that point of time, he was picked up by Sussex, and Sussex is a county in England. In 1914, he was playing for Sussex, and that year, Ranjit Singh ji, who was a legend, batting legend, hadn't been able to travel from Jamnagar because he was engaged in some trial in a court case, and so he couldn't travel. And they saw Hardeep Malik go out to bat in a blue turban, and they thought it was an Indian prince who had come to bat. But it was not the case, because Hardeep Malik was not as good as Ranjit Singh ji. His future didn't lie in the grounds of England, but in the skies of Europe. He went on to become India's first fighter pilot. And Hardeep Malik had a duel with a German pilot, and they shot at each other. These were the first planes, about 15 years after the Wright brothers had invented the flying machine. It's that old. So, they fired at each other, and Hardeep Malik got shot on his thigh, and his aircraft was shredded with bullets. They used to be known as the 20-minute club, because that was the lifespan of a fighter pilot. Longer than it takes from here to Colaba, today. So, or shorter, or equal time,
We had a panel on governance. I think this you should tell them.
Yes, is here. So that was how it was. So they shot at each other, and they crashed on their respective sides. Hardeep Malik saw the German plane crash, and Hardeep Malik somehow managed a soft landing, though the plane kind of was shredded. And he saw the German plane go down as well. Hardeep Malik comes back, goes back to cricket, plays county cricket, comes back to India, joins the diplomatic corps, becomes the ambassador to France and Canada, a very eminent diplomat, and someone decides to write his biography and says, we'd write your biography. So Hardeep Malik says, okay. So he's in his 80s, now 60 years after that. So one day, the biographer comes to him. He says, sir, I have a surprise for you. I want you to meet somebody. It's a German pilot. They had both survived 60 years of travails. So this is a sports come human story spanning 60 years. I mean, there are stories that kind of span half a decade and more in this thing. But this is a story that spanned so much. And you spoke about Haripal Kaushik. Look him up. And his is a story where, he was brought in as a good hockey player into the army, into the Sikh regiment. And then they realized that, he's not enrolled. So they quickly enrolled him, got him in as a clerk. He got commissioned as an officer. He went to the 56 Melbourne Olympics. He was a youngster. He sat outside most of the games. 1960, he goes to the Olympics, and India is beaten by Pakistan for the first time in history. India ends up with a silver medal. And those days, तो hockey में bronze आ जाता तो we party करते हैं. But those days India had never ever lost. So 1960 was the first time. So when they came back, the media really got after them. They thought that was the end of the game of hockey in India. Haripal Kaushik was in the Sikh regiment. He got posted to his battalion in 1962, and that battalion was in Bumla in Arunachal Pradesh, around that area. And we all know what happened in 1962. The India-China war happened, and in the conflict, then Lieutenant Haripal Kaushik and his band of 15 men got lost at the end. And he had also evacuated, by the way, he had evacuated, equipment, men from very difficult situations in that war, for which he was awarded the Veer Chakra. But he had also gone missing in that war for 15-20 days, and they had given him up for dead. He comes back as a wreck, a physical and mental wreck. For 6 months, he couldn't do anything. He was sent to the hospital. He came back. His commanding officer and the people around him and the families of the battalion kind of helped him recoup and get his pieces together. He started playing hockey again, Haripal Kaushik. The next year, the Indian team was being selected. He started to play gradually, dire dire, in the battalion. He was selected. It was a surprise. He goes back, joins the Indian team, gets selected, goes to Tokyo, is a star, and wins back the gold for India.
Amazing story, sir. And I must say that there are more stories like this in the book. This was just a glimpse. We'll give you one more teaser in between. But for the rest of them, you got to pick up the book and buy it. And next, we are going to come back to Kargil and talk to the general. But before that, I want to know that many of you would have heard military folk talking about 0.4721, 0.4329. How many of you have got no clue about what this point means? Zero clue. Even I didn't know before I joined the army, and I felt that, okay, wow. It was a wow moment when I realized what is. So for people who are like me, this is basically height on ground. 4875 is 4,875 meters above the sea level. We are at sea level right now in Mumbai. If you convert this meters into feet, which the British have left us, it comes to around 16,000 feet. The main differential here is that it is very high, it is very lonely, it is very cold, and you don't even have air to breathe. But this is just a backdrop about one location on point of Earth called 0.4875, where something which is very close to the Indian culture came to the fore, and the Indian military culture. And Hindol before and Chopra ji before mentioned a lot about India, its history, its culture, the people that we are. One of it is about the righteousness in fighting and righteousness of war. So when you are at battle, when you are fighting each other, you are at each other's throats, and you have not a quarter given, not a quarter taken. But once the sun settles down or the battle is over, as a culture, we would like to honor even the enemy. Now, rare are the instances where this has happened, extremely rare. But this did happen while you were in Kargil, sir. And you must tell the audience, I'll request you to tell the audience, that how is it that it came about that we had to do something which was beyond Indian Army's call of duty, and yet how is it central to the theme of Indian soldiering that we have all practiced?
Yeah, so, when these infiltrations happened all along the line of control in 1999, the stance that Pakistan as a nation and the Pak Army took when we sort of raised it in hotlines to the Pakistan Army that, all these infiltrations have happened, they said these are not infiltration carried out by the Pak Army. Not a single Pak Army soldier is there. This is your problem. These are your mujahideen. These are your terrorists of Jammu and Kashmir who are sitting there. While after we launched the attacks and captured all these features, we had a whole lot of evidence, conclusively proving that these are Pakistani soldiers. Some of them were in uniform. We captured their I-card, their pay books, the weaponries, the mines, which are used by Pak Army, the radio sets, and in fact, they had the artillery support from the Pak Army from behind. So it was, beyond any doubt that these are Pak Army soldiers. And each and every one of them were carrying his I-card and pay book, actually, probably against the orders. They were told that they should not be carrying because they were, some of them were in that salwar kameez, like the mujahideens. So once the battle was over, we indicated to them that we have your Pak Army soldiers who are dead. We have the mortal remains. You may like to take them back. But to continue with the narrative that these are not our soldiers, the Pakistan as a nation and the Pak Army, they refuse to take the dead bodies of their own soldiers. No nation in the world does that. We have the US Army, which is still looking for the dead bodies of their soldiers of World War II.
In Kohima.
In Kohima, when we were in the military operations, we used to give clearance. Their aircraft used to come and pick up the dead bodies and take them back. No one will be left behind. Everyone will be taken back. And here is a nation and the Pak Army, who, when we were told, we gave them the list, from the I-card and paybook, that these are your soldiers, your officers, whose bodies are with us. You may like to take them back. They refused to continue with that narrative. So then Indian Army being Indian Army, we flew a Maulvi up to point 4875, where my battalion had captured 4875. And there, giving due respect to the religion they belong, we carried out burial of all these soldiers who were there. Even, just to tell the world that what Pakistan is doing, we got the media up in choppers. There was no way they could have walked up, We got the media up on point 4875, and if you go on the YouTube, you'll see many of my videos wherein, we carried out the burial of the Pak soldiers, giving them due respect. So a lot of people ask me, this is the enemy, and this is what they did to our soldiers and all that. So yeah, when he was alive, he was fighting us 2 days back, but then he's dead, and he's died, fighting for his nation. So we went ahead and did what we did. That's what India and Indian Army is all about.
There's a Punjabi phrase, sir, which says "mitti pao." This is both literally and figuratively mitti pao. But Probal, I want to take you, and you are author of 2 books, and there are like multiple stories in this. Yeah. They are like, once you told me they are like my children. But yet every mother has one of their favorite child, I was surely not my mother's favorite child, but I'm sure you have one favorite child in that book. Which one is that?
In the last few questions, you have kind of engaged with all the favorite children. So there are. So I think we have spoken about a few stories. There's a story so they're all the ones that I spoke about were all stories that I've loved, and not that they're any less. But because you asked me to talk about a story that I haven't spoken, I've put it this way. Let me tell you about a story that happened in 1971, just before the India-Pakistan war started. It was above the Boira salient, that is near Kolkata, for the better understanding of a lot of people here. So this was in the eastern India, and it used to be, and this happened. This was a aerial duel between 3 Indian Nats and 3 Pakistani Sabre jets. Now let me kind of simplify it for you. The Indian Nats were these Pakistani Sabre jets were Canadian to the Indian Nats, and the duel took place between 3 Indian planes and 3 Pakistani aircraft. The Indian aircraft shot down the 3 Pakistani aircraft, and 2 of the Pakistani pilots were captured. One of them was Parvez Mehdi. Now Parvez Mehdi was taken in, and there was another Pakistani pilot alongside him. So they were brought to the Indian side, captured by the Indian soldiers. One of those who captured him was Captain H.S. Panag, then Captain H.S. Panag, and then later on General H.S. Panag, father of Gul Panag. So, since we are in Bombay. So, so this happened, and the Indian pilot who shot him down was squadron leader Don Lazarus. So, this happened, and the Pakistani pilots were brought in. After the war, they were repatriated to Pakistan. So Parvez Mehdi went back to Pakistan. Incidentally, Parvez Mehdi was also the course mate, a batchmate of General Parvez Musharraf long back in the 60s. But this is, we are talking about 1971. So they went back to Pakistan. 24 years later, Don Lazarus, much retired, in Kunur, he reads the newspaper, and he opens the newspaper, a morning newspaper, and he reads the news that Pakistan appoints a new air chief, and it's Air Chief Marshal Parvez Mehdi. So he decides to write a letter to him. He writes a letter to Air Chief Marshal Parvez Mehdi, and he is all, he doesn't expect the Pakistani Air Force to write a reply back to him. So he forgets about it. Lo and behold, there is a reply sometime later. So there is a postman at the door, and there is a reply from the Pakistani Air Chief saying that, so he writes to him, congratulating him on his appointment. So the Pakistani Air Chief writes back to him, thank you very much. because he had written that congratulations for your appointment. You may not remember me, but we met in the air many years ago. So the Pakistani air chief writes back saying that, yes, I do. Thank you very much. And you are better than me. So this is after 24 years. But the story doesn't end there. There's कुछ बाकी है उसमें.
वो बुक में लिखा देंगे सर.
हाँ, बुक
में पढ़ लेंगे.
बुक में 2 हिस्से हैं और एक छोटा सा हिस्सा ये है कि कुछ टाइम बाद, 2 years later, the Pakistani premier Nawaz Sharif was to appoint the new army chief. So he goes to Parvez Mehdi and he shows him the photo. He says, this is who I want to appoint as the army chief. And it was the photo of Parvez, or it was the name of Parvez Musharraf. So Parvez Mehdi, who was the batchmate of Parvez Musharraf, didn't quite like him. So he says, आप किसी और को चीफ बना दीजिए, इसको मत बनाइए, आपकी करियर खत्म हो जाएगी. And I am not going to tell you the story after that, but there is another story after that in this one, but I'll leave it to you to read. It's not what you have known, but what you have not known.
I think, sir, the entire focus of our discussion today has been my area specialization for 10 years back, Pakistan. But the general here is actually a China expert. He speaks Chinese. He's been a defense attaché in China and has had as an army commander, was probably the only general officer in the world, and let me be profound about it, to be commanding a theatre of operations which has got 2 nuclear-armed hostile neighbors on its opposite flanks. Nowhere else in the world, I feel, there is a country or there is a theatre of operations where you're expected to fight 2 nuclear-armed adversaries, both looking in the same area. So, sir, the next question or the query, and you've spoken about a lot about that in the book, is, and everyone knows that China's got this, China's got that. We have heard their GDP is so much and their military levels are so much. But after your interactions with them of over 3 years while being in Beijing, and then of course in your service being in Ladakh, and then of course as a Northern Army commander, I would rather flip the question and say that what is it that we have that the Chinese don't?
The short answer to that is the Indian soldier. Yeah, and this is a fact. This is a fact. I saw that in 2020 when China mobilized the complete People's Liberation Army opposite Eastern Ladakh. I was the army commander at that time. And plus, during my 3 years tenure in Beijing, interacted with them very closely. The Indian soldier is very, very experienced. We have tenures, all our battalions have tenures in the Siachen Glacier. We have tenures in the counter-insurgency operations, counter-terrorist operations. On the line of control, we have faced fire on a regular basis. And then your drills, and your SOPs, they really mature and you become an expert actually. And then in 2020, when we saw that, and we were face to face with Chinese again, I realized that, the Chinese soldier man to man cannot match the Indian army. And plus the systems are different. Our systems are that, when I give an order to my, let's say, the co-commanders and then further down to their, brigade and battalion commanders, the initiative is left with them to deal with the task that has been given to them. They can take decisions based on, what is the overall direction that has been given to them. And that is where, they're able to take initiatives, make use of fleeting opportunities. Because if you are looking back for orders every time, then you'll not be able to succeed. Those fleeting opportunities will go. And in the PLS system, they have a dual command system. There's a commander and there's a political commissar. And the channels of reporting are different. Both are distrustful of each other. The political commissar also reports on the commander, based on which he gets his promotion. So that's where the dichotomy lies. And in 2020, when we surprised the People's Liberation Army, when we went and occupied, I'm sure you all are aware, the Zangla, the Rishinla, the Kailash site, which talk about, we sort of got into this OODA loop, something we call observe, orient, direct, and act. Before they could do something, our soldiers were doing something else. Before they could react to that situation, we were doing something else. And they were not in a position to, to react to what we were doing. That's how we succeeded. So, the soldier, Indian soldier, is something that they don't have. They may have a lot of equipment, they have the latest state-of-the-art equipment and all that, but finally it boils down to the man behind the weapon. आपको वो दिल चाहिए trigger दबाने के लिए. That is where it all boils down to. And thank you for asking this question. I commanded the Northern Army, but I am generally more known as the commanding officer of 13 Jackrif, the bravest of the brave. Northern Army, like he was mentioning, looks after the entire Jammu and Kashmir, the line of control, the counter-terrorist operation in J&K, Ladakh, the Siachen Glacier, and the line of actual control on the Chinese border. But people know me as the commanding officer of 13 Jackrif, in the Kargil War, and I feel I take a lot of pride in that. Thank you.
We spoke about your children mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
Is there a child which is missing there? Is
Yeah.
there a story which you haven't written about?
I know what you're getting at, but there is Nikhil is always pushing me to talk about stories that are here and the stories that are not here, which is this question I believe.
I'm only talking about the book.
Only talking about the book, which is not there in the book. Yes. So I've spoken about the story a few times, and I think it's a story that came late, which is a story that also sums up, before I talk about the story, it just sums up the entire philosophy of the book, the saga of 100 years. And that's where I kind of attach my interests to that story. And it starts in 1915 in the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle in Belgium, when British forces, the British Indian Army, was one army where every second soldier was an Indian soldier. So 40,000 British Indian Army troops were mounting an attack on the German army in the battle in the village of Neuve-Chapelle in Belgium. The Germans counterattacked viciously. Initially, the British Indian Army progressed and gained some land, but the German army counterattacked viciously. So one of the soldiers was Subedar Manta Singh, who was part of the Punjab regiment, and he was in the battle. To cut it short, so he was in the battle. He was fighting, and there was this. There's shells falling everywhere. The bullets flying. It was an absolute mayhem, and it was a fog of war. There, in the fog of war, what does he see? He sees his company commander, Lieutenant George Henderson, and he's shot in the arm. He's shot in the abdomen. So George Henderson shot there. So Manta Singh sees George Henderson shot and fatally wounded and dying. What does Manta Singh do? He leaps up from his trench and picks up George Henderson, looks around, sees a wheelbarrow, puts him in the wheelbarrow, and wheels him out of the battle. But in doing so, he gets shot too. Now both of these brave hearts, these soldiers, are out of the battle. The battle is still going on. They are out of the battle. He's rescued his company commander, but he's got fatally wounded. 8 months later, Manta Singh is taken to a hospital in Brighton, and George Henderson is treated in the hospital nearby. 8 months later, George Henderson receives the news that Manta Singh's leg has been amputated. 10 months later, news arrives for George Henderson that Manta Singh has died. George Henderson is sad. He's shocked. He's devastated. He needs to do something. What does he do? He goes to Punjab, seeks out George Henderson's son, Assa Singh, brings him over to England, gets him into the British Army, gets him educated, gets him into the British Army, and in the Second World War, 3 decades later, in the Second World War, Assa Singh, who was a major then, Assa Singh was a colonel in the Second World War. So Assa Singh and George Henderson's son, Robert Henderson, fight shoulder to shoulder against Rommel's forces in North Africa. Second generation of the soldiers, after the first generation had Manta Singh had rescued his company commander. The second generation fought shoulder to shoulder in North Africa. Incredible story. The meat of the story is thereafter, because India becomes independent. Now there's two nations, right? After the independence, Manta Singh's grandson, which is Assa Singh's son, Jaimal Singh, and Robert Henderson's son, Ian Henderson, are also in touch. They're also together in a UN force in the 60s. This is a third generation, which goes on. The story continues. Incredible story of 3 generations, where it begins from the rescue of George Henderson by Manta Singh in the trench of Neuve-Chapelle. But the story doesn't end there, because the story continues a little further. And today, as we stand, as we sit here, as we discuss this. It's been 100 years and over. But the two families are still in touch. How? The two families meet every 2 years in the Chhatri Memorial, which is there in Brighton, as a memorial for Manta Singh for having rescued George Henderson in 1915. The two families are together. They meet every 2 years to commemorate that great incident many years ago. So this is how they look. And this is an extended family of soldiers and their families extended over 100 years. This encapsulates the philosophy of the book, which covers 100 years of history, of stories of human beings across different identities, across different continents, soldiers, etc.
Every second soldier in World War II was an Indian, in World War I was an Indian, and yet, and we have a film panel which will happen, none of the Hollywood films, the biggest ones, whether it is Dunkirk or whether it is 1917, none of them shows anything to do with British Indian Army fighting shoulder to shoulder in the fields of Flanders or in Normandy or wherever it is. So this is something that we need to take home. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. You've been a wonderful audience.